What's up everybody, and welcome back to Calvin Maclure's RP-1 playthrough. This is episode 9. It's quite an episode. I hope you'll enjoy it. We begin with a set of engine test fires for what will be the power plant on the Silver Brant orbital rated booster. With our first orbit attempt fast approaching, I wanted to maximize our chances of success by increasing the reliability of our engines. The third and second stage power plants we have quite a lot of data on from running them on the space planes and the Silver Brant BB, but the North American 75-110s we don't have a lot of data on. Looking at the end results, we end up having some pretty substantial gains in reliability. We are up to 94.4 of a possible 95.1 for actual reliability, and in terms of ignition we're at 92.6. Not great, but certainly not too bad in regards to the possible 95%. And with that, we also get our first ever crew retirement. Maren Norina, who was one of our test pilots for the X-Plane series, who also famously survived several notorious incidents during his campaign flying the 3 series of the space planes. A well-deserved retirement, to be sure. We have in the past flown our XSP-3 aircraft up to 80 kilometers, although we did that unintentionally. This time, this was very much an intentional flight to that altitude. We are kind of pushing the limits, definitely, of what we are capable of going into these altitudes, because we're still rated for only 75 kilometers. However, I knew that with some careful and crafty flying, we could manage to pull this off and return safely. With the first part of the strategy completed, which was to have a very steep climb, which allows for a subsequent steep descent, therefore limiting the amount of time we spend at apogee, the next step was to perform this backflip so that we would be facing a retrograde position, and you'll see why shortly. As soon as we hit the 80 kilometer mark and that part of the contract is complete, we perform a series of propulsion burns to basically increase our speed down and get us out of the danger zone as fast as possible. And finally, we come to one of the most epic milestones in any career playthrough, which is the first attempt at putting an artificial satellite in lower Earth orbit. And so we go through everything, check and recheck to make sure that we are set for flight. And sure enough, we actually do run into an issue, but arguably one of the best ones. All we have to do now is simply roll back, take out the bad engine, swap in a new one, roll back to the pad, and go for attempt number 2. Following a nominal performance of stage number 1, we can finally see that clever second stage in action. The cleverness behind the design is simply that the avionics module, which is needed to control stage 1 through the totality of its flight, is also used to give us the proper orientation for stage number 2. But since the higher up you go in the stages, the more damaging to your delta V excessive weight is, getting rid of all that excess mass is critical. And so by having that avionics unit at the tail end of stage number 2, as soon as we've oriented ourselves and spin stabilized in the proper orientation, we don't need to be guided anymore. So we can just get rid of that excess mass and maximize our results. And there it is, the all-important first artificial satellite contract complete. About the Silver Brant ORB, just a few interesting tidbits. The takeoff weight was 33.7 tons, and with 4 to 5 experimental items on board, it still packed an impressive 10,600 meters per second of delta V. The Peregrine air-launched rocket was born out of really an empty spaceplane hangar that had nothing on the queue for construction, but we did have several items on the VAB build list. So I figured we might attempt at maximizing the available time that we had there and have something of a sounding rocket that could launch some items up into space and maybe score a few scientific points. As it turns out, even though we got nominal performance out of the first stage, I, however, made the very amateurish mistake of failing to ignite our AeroB engine on the second stage. before burnout of the first stage. And so we got that infamous vapor in the fuel lines, and what ended up being as a sort of a successful demonstration ultimately did not yield any interesting results. The next major milestone on our to-do list was to have the first scientific artificial satellite up in orbit, but we still had one missing item for that, and that was the Geiger counter. So with that item now unlocked, we went into our Explorer 2, which was already well underway in being constructed, and we came and added that item to the scientific payload. With that failure on the first stage, I tried nevertheless to maybe try and salvage this mission somehow by turning this into some glorified sounding rocket. So we got a good performance out of the second stage and full duration burn out of the third stage, but ultimately we ended up spending far too little time in space to even generate 0.1 of a science point. That now leaves us with still 189 days left of the contract, but 113 in building the follow-up to Explorer 2. So we really only have one more chance at getting this done. And so I started to get a little concerned about our space program, especially financially. If we fail that attempt, we would go under rather significantly. And so in an attempt to try and cushion the fall should the next attempt also fail and the expiration date of the contract come and go, I started taking on as many X-Plane contracts as I could. They were still fairly lucrative enough to be worth attempting. Again, one of the big advantages of a good rocket plane is all you have to do is fly it, come back home safely, turn it around again, which usually takes at most 14 to 15 days, and you can fly another contract right away. Polar orbits are something that the Silver Brant ORB, without any modifications whatsoever, is definitely capable of. So that was definitely a contract that was within our reach. With the successor to the failed Explorer 2 mission now complete and rolled out to the pad, we now had less than 70 days remaining to the contract, which is far too little time to attempt a fourth should we require it. So with no real possibility of a fourth and backup attempt, this flight was make or break for our space program. With a good performance out of the first stage and a good light on the second, we were well underway in achieving this contract. All we had to do now was get a good light on the third. Breathing a very great sigh of relief, we made it into orbit when it mattered the most. The rocket performed flawlessly, every stage burned to depletion, and we got into a very nice orbit. All we had to do now was to collect the data that we needed and send it back home, and that would be that. And so with that milestone done and out of the way, we begin preparations for the next, which will be the first solar-powered satellite. Plans in preparation for the first polar are already well underway, and so if all goes well for that, the first solar-powered will be right on its heels. And thus concludes episode 9, somewhat of a roller coaster episode if you ask me. I know that when we had to go for that second attempt at the scientific satellite, my heart rate was pacing just a little bit more than usual. As always, thank you so much for stopping by and watching. I really hope you enjoy these. I know I enjoy making them for you. If you like what you see, please do like and subscribe. As always, it does help out. Until next time, I'll see you on the next flight.